Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. So for you guys who are new to the channel, please don't forget to subscribe, like the video, as well as leave your comments so that I know what you guys think about the content. So in today's tutorial, we're going to be looking at how you can fetch internet resources using two of Python's packages, modules, which is the urllib as well as the request module. Now, if you don't have the request module already installed on your machine, you can simply use this command, which is Python module pip install request, or you can use Python 3 module pip install request, depending on the Python version that you have. So to start with, I'm going to first of all import. So import urllib.request. Then after importing, because in this tutorial I'm going to be using my GitHub account. And so because I'm going to be using that, I'm going to use the GitHub API. And so I need to connect to that first. So I need to come up with the URL. So URL is going to be equal to, so I'll say HTTPS, then I'll say api.github.com, then I'll say users slash, then I'll simply put my username there, of course. So this is a variable that I've already defined, username, so that's the one that has my username. So this is the URL that I'm going to make. Then I also need to make some headers. So I'm going to call this header. It's going to be a dictionary. Then I'll say authorization, because I'm going to use basic authorization to access my GitHub. So authorization, so because it's a dictionary, then I'll say F. So I'll use bearer. And I'm going to replace this with my token. So again, token is another variable that I've already declared, and so it's going to be bearer than token. So this is the header that I'm going to have. Of course, it's a dictionary. So after doing this, I now need to make a response object. So I'll simply say response. So response will be equal to urllib dot request with a capital letter R. Then I simply need to put my URL which is already defined. Then you say headers to show that this is what you want to add to the header. So headers will be equal to header, which is this dictionary that I created. So headers is equal to header, and this will allow us to get a response object together with all the data that we have. So this is going to be more like a file, so you can open it using the with command. So say with urllib dot request dot url open. Then I'll put my response object. So response. Then I'll say as, so let me just say rec. So now that I've done this, I can now read whatever is in here. So I'm going to say R will be equal to rec.read. And so now I'll be able to read whatever is in there. Of course, I can also get the headers. So I'm going to read. So if you also need the headers, you simply say, so I'm going to say head. So head will be equal to rec.headers. And so this will give me the headers that are there. Of course, the headers come in dictionary format. So head is equal to rec.headers. And so after I've done this, I can now see the text that's there. Of course, it comes, R right now is in binary, is in byte form. So if you want to convert it into let's say maybe ASCII format, or maybe you want to convert it into maybe UTF-8. So let's first of all print R. We see what I'm talking about. So print R. And so if you notice, there's a B here in front showing that it's actually in byte form. But now if you want to maybe convert it into maybe UTF-8, then you need to say something like print. Then I'll say r.decode. Then you specify the format that you want. So let's say maybe I want UTF-8, and so now it has come as a string. So if you want to check the type, so let's say you want to check the type of that. So you say type of var, and it's going to show you that this is class byte. But then if I check the type for r.decode utf8, so let me just check the type of this. So checking the type of this is bringing class string. So if you use r.decode utf8, it's going to return it in bytes. So now after seeing all this data, let's also now see how you can access the headers, because the headers come in dictionary format. So if I was to say print, so let's just print type head, because if you guys remember, we used head as a variable that will collect the headers. So type head, and it's saying class http.client, then that message. So now, since we now have head as the headers, we can now say things like maybe print. So we say print head, and now it has brought all the headers that we have. So we have the server, which is github.com. We have the date, we have the content type, which is application/JSON. We have the content length, and all this other information that we have. So let's say maybe you're interested in getting the request ID. So you can simply get that. So depending on what header you want to get the value for, so we can simply say print, or maybe let me first of all put it into a variable. Excuse me. I'm going to say value is equal to, so I'm going to say head. So I'll say head.get. Then I can simply copy whatever that was. So in this case, we are going to get the value of X GitHub request ID, which is where is that? So X GitHub request ID, which is this one here. So that's what we are going to get. So value will now contain that. So if I also print value, then I'll get the same ID, which is A19D and all that. So this is how you can get your access, your values. You can also check the type. You can check the content that's there, how you can also change from bytes into any type of format that you want, if it's UTF-8 or if you want it to be in ASCII format. So basically, this is how you can use the urllib to get values for headers. And if you also want to get the body, so if you want to get the body, use .read, and then you just decode it using UTF-8, and that's going to give you the body. Now for the headers, you use .get, so .get, then you specify the header that you want to get the value for, and that will give you the value. Now, what if you want to post data? So in a scenario where you want to post data, so you also need to declare a dictionary. Of course, if you don't want to use a dictionary, as in maybe you have a value that's going to hold your dictionary, you can simply do everything in the in the request. So let me again say response, because I'm not going to actually post anything. We'll just say that. So what you need to do, since we already have a URL, you can simply say response is equal to urllib dot request and dot request with a capital letter R. Then you put your URL. Then if you want to put data, you specify to say that this is data. Then you now equate it to a dictionary. So in a case where you already made a dictionary, you can simply say maybe data is equal to maybe whatever dictionary you made. So maybe any variable that you had. So data is equal to the dictionary you made. So the dictionary is going to look something like this, because it's a dictionary. So maybe let's say it's going to have something like name. Maybe this is the value that you want, this is the data that you want to send. So it's going to be name, then comma. Then you also specify the name of the key. So the key in this case is name, then the value is hard. But of course, this is going to go as data. And then if you want to specify the headers, just as we did when we were connecting to the excuse me, just as we did as we were connecting to the GitHub API, I use headers. So headers was equal to header. And so if you want to send data, you say data is equal to, then you make a dictionary, and that same dictionary is the one that's supposed to have all the data that you want to send. So basically, this is how you get to make a post. This is how you get to make a post. What else do we need to look at? So we can now also look at errors, because errors are going to, you might encounter errors. If you're using HTTP as we are, you might have an HTTP error. Now, how can you handle those HTTP errors? Of course, there's also URL error, which is more like a parent class of HTTP error. And so if you use URL error, it's going to hold everything, including the HTTP errors. So there are three things that you need to put in mind, which is if you are using, if you get a URL error, you can have e.reason. So you might have a reason. Then if you are using HTTP errors, you might, if you catch HTTP errors, you might have the code as well as the page, the page itself. So you might have the code as well as the page for the error page itself. And so now, how do you get to do all that? So again, because we already created a response object. So let's just imagine that we've already created a response object, and so you can say try. So say try. Of course, the problem is that I'm using, I was commenting, so let's say try. So say try, then we can now try opening the same response object. So say with urllib dot request dot url open. So because we already created the response object, so we are not going to create it again. So URL open the response, then we can just say this as rec. So we want to do something with this. So say maybe r is equal to rec dot read. So r is equal to rec dot read. Then from there, we can now print something. So we can say print. We're going to print r dot code. So we need to decode it into UTF-8. If you want, you can use ASCII and all that, but then we're going to decode it into UTF-8. And from there, we can now accept. So you say accept. So you say accept urllib dot error. Then we'll say dot HTTP error as E. Of course, you can use any other variable in place of E. You can use maybe error itself or any other variable, but just make sure that you don't use any of the reserved names. So now that we've caught this exception, we can now print. So as I said, HTTP error has got two things that you can print, which is the error page as well as the code. So the code can be it can be maybe 400, it can also be 405, and other different codes that you can have. So we can print the code by saying e.code. So this will print the code onto the terminal. Then if you want, you can also print the error page itself. So we can also print, so you say e.read, and so this is going to print the error page. So this print the error page. So now this is only going to catch HTTP errors. Now HTTP errors that what HTTP is one type of protocol. Of course, there can also be FTP and all those different types of protocols. And so URL error catches everything. Let's say maybe you also have a faulty connection. Let's say maybe your network connection is kind of poor and all that. So URL error is what's going to catch that. And so URL error has got one, which is called reason. So you can also catch that using except. So say urllib dot error dot dot url error as maybe we can just call this error. And so for this one, you can print error dot reason. So for this one, you can print error.reason. So this is how you get to handle all the errors that might arise from maybe using HTTP requests and all that, and the rest. So of course, it's not going to bring any errors for me, but this is good because in case of anything, maybe network is poor or anything, then you know to say that the URL error is going to catch that. Then the HTTP error is also going to catch maybe if the server wasn't found and all those types of errors, then the HTTP error is going to catch that. And so you can print the error code. Then if you want, you can also print the error page itself. So I'm just going to press enter. That. So it hasn't brought any errors if you've noticed, and it has just brought the string itself, which is the r.decode utf8. But then in a case where there were any errors, then this is what would have happened. So this is how you get to handle errors in urllib. And so now that we are done with urllib, we can now go to request. So request is also kind of works similar to urllib, except that I kind of like requests more because the syntax is a bit easier and you don't get to do a lot of things. And I also forgot one on the part where you need to post if you want to post data. So when you're using urllib to post data, okay, let's just do something. So just say import. You need to say urllib dot request. Then you can also import urllib dot parse. So parse is what's going to help us to encode the URL. So we use URL encode to encode that, then also encode it into UTF-8. So let's say maybe you have you have certain data that you can say, maybe let's say you have data as values. So let's say it's the same data which is name, then I'm just going to put name there which is hard. So now that we have value which is name and hard, we can now say data would now be equal to urllib dot parse, then we'll now say dot, so say URL encode. So URL encode, and then we'll specify what we want to encode, which is the value. So URL encode value, then again we'll say data will be equal to, so we'll say data dot encode. So you now specify the type that you want. If you want to encode it into UTF-8, if you want to use ASCII, so let's just say maybe want to encode it into UTF-8. So now that I've done this, we now have this is data value, and so now we can use it easily in our in the response object. So now when we want to make the response object, of course I'm not going to do that, so you can simply say response. So response will be equal to urllib dot request, then dot request again with the capital letter R, so dot request, and then you now specify the URL. Then in this case, you can simply say data because it's already there. It's data. So you simply say URL, then comma data, and this is what's going to make a post request. And so once you do this, you are going to have the response object, and so you can open it the same way that we're doing. So you can use the with, you can use with, so you say with urllib dot request dot url open, then you put the response object as r or any other variable that you want to use. Then you can call the read function on that one, and then you can get your data like that. Then you also need to decode it afterwards. So afterwards, when you get the when you make the r variable as well as we did previously, which is this one here. So you do the same thing. So r is equal to that dot read. Then you now print. So print r dot decode that in order to get the body of the response. So now that we are done with this, we can now go to the request module. So now for the request module, after you've installed it, you can now simply say import requests. And so after importing requests, it's really easy, as I said, you guys. So even for this one, let's also make our URL. So if you remember what our URL was, so it was f that, then it was https, then api.github.com/users. Then I'll just put my username, which is a variable, of course. So that username, then the token, I also have a token. And so we can now create the header. So again, I'm going to say header is equal to, so it's a dictionary. So I'm going to say authorization. So authorization that, then it's going to be bearer. So bearer, then I need to replace that with my token. So I'll replace that with my token, and so that's it. So we've now created the dictionary header, and we also have URL. So now if you want to use requests, you can simply say response. So again, create response. So response will be equal to, so say request. So now you need to specify what HTTP method you're using. Of course, we've got different HTTP methods. There's get, there's also post, excuse me. You can also use put, you can also use delete, you can also use head in order to get the headers, and you can also use options in order to see the different HTTP methods that are that are supported. So in this case, we just want to make a simple GET request. So HTTP request.get, then we'll say URL. So you specify the URL. Then you say headers. So headers will be equal to header. And so that's it. And so now we have a response object. So now that you have this response object, you can print the data that's there. Now, the good part about this one is that you don't need to do all those things like where you need to open it as a file, maybe with whatever, open as anything and stuff like that. You don't need to use that with response. So for this one, if you want to see the body, you use so we'll say use, okay, maybe, okay, yeah. So use dot text to see body. Then you use dot status code. This is to see the return code. So if you want to see the return code, if it maybe, as we discussed earlier, if it may be a 400, maybe the page isn't found and stuff like that. If there are any errors, 400, 405, 404, anything like that. So use status code in order to see that. Or maybe if it's a 200 response, if it's a 200, okay, you can use that. Then in order to see the encoding, so to see encoding, or if you want to change the encoding, you use dot encoding itself. So you simply say dot encoding, then you can equate it maybe if you want UTF-8, or maybe if you want maybe ASCII and all that. Let us see how we can do all this using the same response object that we have. So if I want to print the data that's in there, I can simply say response. So I'll say response.text, and this is going to print the data for me. Of course, it's already in string format. So unlike urllib, this one is really good because you don't need to decode. All the decoding and stuff like that is done for you. So you use print, then response.text, and so that to give you the body. And then if you want to see the code, the return code, you can say response.status code, and it has brought 200, which is 200. Okay. And then if you want to see the encoding, you can say print. So let us just print the encoding itself. So we'll say print response dot encoding, and it's in UTF-8. So the decoding has already been done for us, and so this is the good part about using requests. Requests is kind of like easier as compared to urllib, and so I mostly prefer using requests as compared to urllib. Now, how can you use post? Because right now what we've used is get. Now, how can you use post together with requests? So again, same thing. Of course, we've already imported requests, but then I just want you guys to follow along. So import requests. Then from there, we can now create our data. So let's just say I'm going to call this values. Sorry, so I'm going to call this values. So values is equal to, so it's supposed to be in dictionary format. So I'm going to say values is equal to maybe name. So say name, then we'll say the name, which is hard, and that's it. So now that we've made these values, whatever thing, and so now we can again create a response object again. So I'm not going to use post. Post is kind of dangerous because I don't want to mess up anything that's in, and so I'm not going to execute the command. But generally, this is how you use post. So in order to create the response object, so you say response will be equal to, so you say request. So request dot, so because we are making a post request, so you simply say request dot post. Then from there, you specify the URL. So you say URL and comma, and then you also add your data. So data is equal to values. So unlike in urllib, in this one you don't need to encode the values, the values, and use maybe the urllib.parse, if you guys remember. So just as we did for urllib, of course you need to specify what the type of encoding that you want to use. So we specified, we used the urllib dot request dot URL encode. So that's the one that URL lib.parse.url encode. Then we specify to say that we want it to be in UTF-8 when we use data.encode. So you need to do that with URL lib, but then when you're using requests, you don't need to do all that. Now, what if I want to get the headers? So if you want to get the headers, of course we can use request.head. So just as I said, you can use different HTTP methods with requests. So request.get, you can also use request.put, delete, and all those. Of course, for the headers, you can also get the headers even when you use .get. So let's see how you can get the headers from the same .get that we used. So let me just check. Okay, so we had the response object already created. If you notice, this was a comment, so the response object is still the same. So if I was to repeat this command, so I just don't want you guys to get confused. So I haven't changed the response object. This was a comment, and so response is still equal to Let me just check. So import request. So response is still equal to request.get. Then the URL, if you guys remember, it's this one here. Then headers is equal to header. And so it's still the same response object. And so now, if you want to get the headers, you can simply say print. Then we'll say response. So same response object. And you simply say dot headers. And so this will give you the headers that are there. So you have server, which is github.com, you have date, you have sun, whatever, and stuff like that. So headers even here is still, you can use it as dictionary type. So it's at case sensitive, which is of course dictionary. So you can want to get the server name. So server is github.com. So if I want to print github.com onto my command onto the command prompt, command line, then I can simply say print. Of course, if you want, you can add it into some variable, or you can simply use print. So I can say my var. So my variable is equal to response. So I'll say response dot. So because we want the headers, so headers then dot get, then you specify what header you want to get the value for. So I'm simply going to copy server, then I'll paste it there. And so we now have my var holding github.com because that's the value for the server header, github.com. And so now you can print this. And so we can simply print. So say print, then I'll say my var, and this will print that. So print my var now has github.com. So that's how you can get the headers. That's how you can also make post requests and all that. So this is what I thought of sharing with you guys for today. And oh yeah, I forgot one thing. I forgot one thing. So now, how do you get to check if maybe it's a valid JSON and all that? So let's again do the same thing that we did. So I'm going to use request. So now this is going to be like a full script, so to say. But then in this script, of course, it's not going to work with JSON probably. And so let's see what's going to happen. But generally, this is how you use .json and how you can check maybe if and how you can catch maybe if it's not JSON and things like that. And all that we're going to do that in the same on this part. So you can again import requests. So once you've imported requests, and you can now create of course the URL. Of course, you saw how we created the URL. You also make the header, and then you make your response object. So I still have the same response object. So response is equal to request. So request dot get. So you say response is equal to request dot get. So response